Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and I told you I'd show you how to set a bale spring for the Mitchell 300. This is one of Joyce's reels. The bale is not tripping, and I've taken the rotor and everything off because I want to just show you the whole inside works on how to rebuild the bale and make it work. So we have the bale spring. These are side plate screws. I'm going to put those with the rest of the reel. I'm going to be rebuilding that reel in a little bit. But I just thought that I get a lot of questions on this an awful lot of the time. So this is your bale trip mechanism. And I'm going to take that off only for the sense of making sure it's clean, because when I took the baffle plate off here, which is the trip for this, I noticed we have some sand or dirt or whatever it is under these washers. And it's important to note that you've got to keep these washers kind of in the sequence it's in. If there's 3 of them below there, they were installed the factory that way to provide the clearance on that baffle plate for the trip. And it's important to make sure that they are held that way, and that you don't install more or less than them on the way back out. So I'm just going to clean those pieces up before we get into the bale itself. And there was 1 on top. So there's 3 on the bottom, 1 on the top, and I know that, but each reel does differ a little bit, so make sure that when you take it off, count the number that are underneath there and then reinstall it that way. I'm going to go the full piece on this. I'm going to do all of this. So there's a spring that holds the trip lever. It's attached by held in by a screw there, and I'm going to remove the trip lever next. There's a big button screw that goes with the trip lever. I'm going to lay these out on my desk here for a moment. And that's your trip lever, and it's hard to get that one confused, but this is the top of the trip lever, and that's what's going to sit into the nook here and kind of hold that together. And I want to do that because a lot of the times, like in this reel, you're going to find that there's some dirt and debris and stuff that's just accumulated in there. And that's just a function of the way that the Mitchell spool system sits. It sits this way. And of course what that means is every time the wet line's coming down in here, it's only got one place to go, and that's in the cup. And so if you're bringing in a lot of sand and junk over time, it's going to accumulate in here. So when you service a reel, please make sure that you do clean that inside out, because it's likely that that's where a lot of stuff, debris and the like, will start to accumulate. Okay, so I've got the rotor off. I've taken the trip release off, and now I'm going to put the bale spring on, because I find that that's the best and the easiest way to do that. There's 2 holes in the rotor cup here, and if you look at the bale spring has one tag end is at a 90 degree. The other is at a flat straight out 90. The flat out 90 sits in the cup like that. I always put the bales on in the neutral position, which would be this way. And you want to make sure that you get the spring into the hole in the bale. And then you simply rotate that over, put the big button back in. Okay, and then once you have the screw back in, just test it. This one's firing fine. So I'm thinking what may or may not have happened here, we're never sure, is that that's spring, which belongs in this hole here. There's a hole, that's where we put it in from the back side. May have gotten loose, and maybe it was just kind of circulating on the rise. So that's how you get your bale side set in. While we're at it, and we can put the other part back in here so that we don't lose it. Just check again, because sometimes you get that broken. Sometimes the bend in the the wire will prevent it from firing. All right, now we're going to set this up. So that's the top side in. So you want to find your slot, get it down under, and sometimes it's not that easy to get back in, but you'll get it. Sits like this. You snake it through, that top end is up. Then you want to grab that little spring again, or screw. I don't know why I have a tendency to call screws springs. Let's go ahead and put that back in. I'm just going to get this started for a moment because I want to make sure that I can get this. Oh, that won't be a problem. All right, let's just tighten this down here. This has got a little collar that eventually this is going to ride in, so it has to be centered. There you go, and then just test to make sure that that's moving easily. Get a drop of oil on that. And then the only other piece left on this one then is just putting that firing spring back on. You may or may not have better dexterity in your hands than I do, so I'm just going to grab this with a needle nose pliers and just kind of loop it over the side. There you go. So now this should fire back every time that you go. So we're going to set the bale now. We're going to trip the lever manually, and we got a nice strong bale flip. And I like to say it's just as easy as that. So we're going to reinstall this after I get done. As many of you will see, I have the rest of the reel in parts here, and I'm going to go ahead and clean and reinstall and reassemble that. But that's how you do the bale spring. Let's review quickly. The tag end goes on the left side of this. You set this in a neutral position. You remove the bale on both sides so you don't have to fight anything. Set this up in a neutral position. There's a spring hole somewhere right around there. And then as you go to tighten, make sure that your bale is square, that it's not hopping off this post here. I remove this because it's just easier to do. You could probably work around it, but in my case, I just like to take it out because, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of debris and stuff tends to accumulate in this cup. So get rid of that debris while you're at it. In this case, I cleaned up the baffle plate. And a lot of people wonder how this thing trips. Well, when you're in this mode here, you'll see that this arm has moved in. I'm going to remove these 3 washers off the baffle plate for a moment to show you. This is your ramp. So you can see a ramp here, and as this is coming around, that ramp rides up and kicks this in like that to fire. So there you go. That's your bale set on a Mitchell 300 reel. Alrighty, on to the building the reel. If you've liked this, if this has been helpful, well, that's kind of what this is all about. Please indicate that by liking the video. If you want to see more of these, please subscribe. And if you have any questions on any reels in particular, even if it's not a Mitchell, I mean, I work on all kinds of reels, leave that in the comments as well. I do try to reply to all. And then finally, if you have a reel that needs to be repaired, and you'd like me to service that for you, well, please send me an email at the business card that follows, and I will be happy to provide you with repair information. So this is Dennis at Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching. Okay, so here's some bonus footage. I figured why not show you the rest of this while I was at it. And you now know how to set the bale, so let's just go show you the assembly of this reel in case you've got your whole reel apart, like I do here. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that the bottom of the cup, which has the pinion gear on it, is coated with grease. That's going to make this one operate easier. All right, I got a little bit on the outside. Let's get rid of that. Make sure that the shaft that pinion gear rides on gets a nice little dose of grease as well. And although you don't see it, there's a little washer right here. It belongs, might be hard to see, but there's a little washer right there that belongs below that pinion gear. Make sure that washer is on there, otherwise it's going to ride tight. All right, cup goes on. Then we have the 3 washers that I previously mentioned belong here. There's a silver one which goes first for whatever reason, or it did on this stack. Then there's 2 of the copper washers. The baffle. The baffle has a little indent here. You can see it if I hold it this way. There's a little indent there, and there's a little cutout in the inside of the body there that holds the cup on. Then we have our last washer. We have our 12mm nut, and we have the opportunity to use a tool that I use for so much other stuff. I don't use it as much on the Mitchell, but this is actually a Mitchell tool. Go ahead and tighten that down, give that cup a spin. That's spinning nicely. Okay, so now we've got the pieces and the parts for the internal side of the Mitchell. It starts with this little slide. This is going to anchor the axle shaft to go up and down. This is an oscillating kind of a system on this one, kind of planetary gear, I guess, or not quite sure what they actually call it. But there's 2 sides to it. There's a hook side, which kind of goes up, and there's a channel side that goes down. And there's 2 little screws that I took out that belong in the holes on each. So those of you that know me and little screws, you probably notice there's an opportunity to go get a cup of coffee. This may take me a moment or 2 to get these in. And you want to take that off. If you're servicing a Mitchell reel, you want to take that off, because if you don't take that little slide off, you don't know what's trapped behind there where that axle, the axle shaft is riding. And for whatever reason, one of the weaknesses on this Mitchell is bent axle shafts, but also it accumulates a lot of dirt. As we were talking about before, there's not a lot of places that water that gets inside the cup can go. But one of the places it can go is kind of ride down that axle shaft into this. So I always make it a habit when I do my Mitchell tune-ups to take that back plate off. And even if it's painful for me to kind of get those small screws back in, it's well worth the time to do just that. And you can put a little bit of grease on the back of that if you wanted to. I put the grease on the axle. And those are the 2 screws that come through the back case, if you were ever wondering what those 2 screws were. All right, here is my axle shaft. I've cleaned it off. There's tarnish on there, but there's nothing that's wrong with that. And this is where I put my grease. So just going to grab my brush. I'm going to make sure that I get good grease here on this arm. Now usually I tell you don't load the axle up with grease, but this is the part that's going to slide against that back plate here. So you do want to get it there. The rest of it can be a light coating of grease like we normally do. And then we're just going to come through the top. Slide that down, and now you have your point sitting here. That's going to accept the, I always get this wrong. I just call it the carrier for the oscillating gear. But whatever this thing is called, I apologize to the purists out there that want me to use every name that's proper. I call it a carrier. All right, there's a stud on the bottom of this one. The stud goes into that hole. It's going to hold it like that. Then I generally push that whole assembly down, because the next one up is this oscillating gear. You're going to notice that there's 3 studs on the inside of this gear. First base, second base, third base. And those are important. You're going to put those down to load. And this one takes some playing around. Sometimes I get it right. Most of the time I have to play with it. Get a good coating of grease onto all of the teeth on that gear. And then find your 3, first, second, third, if you will, and put them on the downstroke. I might have to move this up just a little bit. You want 2 of them meshing into the holes here. So like first and third is going to be here, and second is going to be pointing down. Then turn this. And if you have full travel on this without it getting stuck, then you've installed it properly. So I got lucky here. And I'm just going to put a little bit of grease now onto the top of that channel, which is where the inside of that gear is sliding. Right, so that takes care of your main gear, takes care, your oscillating gear and your rotor. Let's come over to the other side of this then. This is the business end, this is the gear side. So we have a plate that we've cleaned up. Love these gears, they're aluminum. You have two sets of gears on this. You have one that's driving this small gear here. You have the other one that's driving the pinion gear. So actually it's driving the gear that's driving the pinion gear. We'll get there in a moment. Let's take the main gear then. Looks like I forgot to clean the face of this. Clean the back, not the face. And to Joyce's credit, this wheel was pretty clean. Just seemed to have had the bale issue there. So I'll paint up on the top. Again, get good grease onto these. You don't have to get in every tooth, but make sure that it gets its fair share of grease there. All right, that goes back into the case once we get some grease onto the main shaft. Once you've installed that, then we have the one that the main gear drives. Check those teeth, make sure that they're not damaged. This reel seemed to have been working fine before I started, so I didn't feel any damaged teeth. If you're working on a Mitchell, you're going to find that this gear is the Mitchell 300. This gear has changed, particularly if you have the 300A. It's a different style. They're not interchangeable parts. All right, so that one comes up top here. And put a little bit of grease onto the shaft on the bottom of this one. I'm going to take the other gear, and again, I'm not a purist on this. I'm not even sure what it's called. Probably called a transition gear. Goes by any other name, right? Make sure that these are working well. So this is going to take the energy off this main drive here, this small one, and it's going to turn the oscillating gear. And again, just get a good amount in there. That goes below. And you can turn the whole assembly to make oops, I got it backwards. Sometimes I think upside down trying to do these videos. Just trying to make sure everything's smooth. And then we can turn it over and install that side plate. Like that, just line up your holes. I'm going to my parts tray now for this. So some folks have asked, how do you get the screws out if they're stuck or if you have a broad shoulder on it, and boy, are you in trouble with that one. The best I can do is recommend a penetrating oil or a rust shock kind of an oil, like a a WD-40 and a liquid wrench and a PB blaster and those kinds of things. But if they're stuck, you may wind up finding a new housing. These occasionally stick. What I generally find the issue with the screws on these side plates is that slot gets worn and kind of gets butterflied. And if it gets butterflied, it's hard to get a screwdriver onto them. Okay, coming to the moment of truth here. Does it all work? All right, give it a roll. There you go. Now I had that in the off position. Now we have an anti-reverse. And more importantly, did that bale, which wasn't tripping, trip? It sure does. All right, Joyce, 1 out of 3 done. So that's your Mitchell 300 for those of you who stayed around to watch the reassembly. And in this case, we've got a spool. You don't have to take the drag adjuster knob off to take the spool out. So this spool has got a D on it. In other words, most of the is round, and then you have one flat side. You need to align the D side with that, just like that. And we can tighten down the drag adjuster. Make sure it doesn't cross strip. And again, once you have this thing set, it's kind of set for life. You don't have to take this off, to take the spool off. You push the button in the middle on, just like that. One more final test here. One more for posterity. And again, if you need to remove the spool, don't take that button off. Just push in on the center release point, put it back on. That's it. All right, so thank you for watching. Again, if you stuck around for this and you have questions, leave them in the comments, whether it's about a Mitchell reel or any other for that matter. If you want to see more, please subscribe. It's what keeps my channel vibrant. And finally, if you have a reel that needs to be repaired, well, I have a business card that follows this. Please contact me on my email, and I will provide you with the repair information. So this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching.